When the night of the 2023 NFL Draft rolled around, we expected Bryce Young and CJ Stroud to go at the first 2 overall picks. After that, there was a lot of hype for both Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. Personally, I expected all 4 of those guys to go in the top 10, but as we saw, Levis fell to the second round, and Richardson was taken with the 4th overall pick by the Indianapolis Colts. As a Colts fan myself, I didn't really know how to react to this pick. While I originally thought he had a lot of potential at the next level, I was worried about his production, was worried about his actual quarterbacking ability, and was worried that he was just a hyped up athlete. In today's video though, I want to talk about why the Colts drafted Richardson, talk about how he got to this point in his rise, and why he could eventually save the Indianapolis Colts. But before we get started, be sure to leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new and love football content, and turn on post notifications so you never miss when I upload. Now, let's talk about Anthony Richardson. He was originally from the city of Miami, Florida, but at 10 years old, he would move to Gainesville. By his freshman year of high school, Richardson was already 6 foot tall and was dominating older competition on the basketball court and on the football field. He was ahead of schedule, and current Gator wide receiver Trent Whittemore had this to say. Quote, I think the first time we actually met was my sophomore year of high school, his freshman year playing East Side. He was at receiver, I believe. I was kind of like, who is this kid? He looked like he should probably be in college, and he was a freshman in high school making crazy plays. For obvious reasons, he continued to practice and develop and started to gain serious recruiting attention. As a junior, Richardson would pass for 1,567 yards with 17 touchdowns and 6 picks. He also rushed for nearly 1,000 yards on the ground and had 16 scores. He led his team to a 7-4 record, and that is why he was a huge name. He said, quote, my freshman year, I didn't really know about signing. Some people go to college and some people don't. Being here and looking back to where I was, it feels good. I finally made it to my dreams. That's why he decided to stay home and play for the Gators. He committed after their Friday Night Lights recruiting event, but some people thought that wouldn't happen. Many believed that Florida was going to go after recent Bama decommit Carson Beck, and Richardson decided he was going to explore other options too. It would not last long though, as Beck would go to Georgia, and Jeff Sims would go to Georgia Tech. This meant that Richardson would re-sign with the Gators and was very excited for the opportunity. Being from Gainesville, he was excited to be the local legend. He said, quote, it's a blessing, not only because my family is super close and watched from just around the corner, but it's a blessing because I'm being a role model to the young people in this generation in Gainesville and letting them know that anything is possible and they can go anywhere they want to go. It's all a blessing, you know, I'm truly blessed. Both Florida fans and Anthony were happy that he would be arriving in Gainesville, and 24/7 Sports was really high on him. They ranked him as a 4-star recruit, the number 9 dual threat quarterback, and the 204th best player in the class of 2020. So, as someone who would need a little bit more polishing in his game, how would he end up doing at Florida, and would he pan out? Richardson would arrive as the 3rd string quarterback behind Kyle Trask and Emory Jones. The Gators would have a terrific 2020 season, and Richardson would have a chance to play in 3 games. He run the ball 3 times against Missouri, had 2 plays against Arkansas, and then had 1 play which went for a touchdown against Oklahoma. He finished the year at 27 yards and 1 touchdown. Going into 2021, many fans were excited for a quarterback battle between Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson. It ended up going down to the wire, but eventually Mullen would name Emory as the starting guy. At first, many were excited to see what Emory could do, but after he struggled, some thought it was time to turn to Richardson. Against USF, he would complete 3 of 3 passes for 152 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then had 4 carries for 115 yards and another touchdown there. That's a ridiculous stat line, and every time Anthony Richardson touched the ball, it seemed he had a chance to take it the distance and would make this Florida offense so much more dynamic. But a common trend from Dan Mullen is he likes to stick with one quarterback. Richardson would only have 6 plays against Kentucky before he would throw an interception in a 42-0 loss to Vanderbilt. He'd get an opportunity to play in their road loss against LSU, and in that game, he passed for 167 yards with 3 touchdowns and had another score on the ground, but would have 2 costly turnovers, and they would lose 49-42. Richardson would also get a chance to play against Georgia, and he had 2 costly interceptions in that game and failed to score a touchdown. The final time he would play the remainder of the year was against Florida State, as in a 3-point victory, he'd throw for 1 touchdown. Richardson was a mixed bag as a redshirt freshman. Yeah, he of course had some highlight plays, but he also struggled with turnovers, and whenever he got time, he was not consistent enough to earn that starting job away from Emory. I'm not saying Jones was any good either. On the year, we finished with 529 yards passing, 6 touchdowns, and 5 picks. He'd also have 400 yards on the ground and 3 scores there. During the spring, it was announced that Emory Jones was going to transfer to Arizona State, so now the job was Anthony Richardson's. Yeah, technically there was a battle between him and Jack Miller, but that was settled pretty quickly, and new head coach Billy Napier wanted to see what Richardson could do and if he could be his guy. At the beginning of the year, there were a ton of mock drafts hyping him up, and some even had him as a first-round pick. This was clearly all based on potential and not actual stats so far, but how would he do when he actually took the field? Well, his first game, he'd be very impressive. Against number 7 Utah, he threw for 168 yards and then had over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. He ended up having the game-winning score. The Florida offense looked great, and he had that it factor that every Florida fan has been waiting for. He'd lead them to an upset over number 7 Utah, and his Heisman hype started to soar. The following weekend, he'd be matched up with another big-time SEC quarterback in Will Levis. This was supposed to be one of the premier quarterback battles of the SEC this year, and neither quarterback was too impressive, and Richardson was not great at all. He went 14 of 35 for 143 yards and 2 interceptions. He obviously didn't play very well, and they lose by 10 points to Kentucky. One weekend later, Richardson would once again struggle. He went 10 of 18 for 112 yards and 2 picks against USF, and if it weren't for a botched snap, USF could have brought that game to overtime and may have upset them in the swamp. Luckily they'd win though, but 2 bad performances in a row were not looking good for Richardson. Things would not get any easier in week 4, as he'd now have to travel on the road to number 11 Tennessee. This was going to be his biggest challenge yet, and he was up for it. He threw for a career-high 453 yards with 2 touchdowns and also had 1 interception. It didn't stop there though, as he also had 62 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground, and he literally put Florida on his back, put on a show on the road, and almost led them to a win. They would recover a late onside kick, and he'd have an opportunity to complete a Hail Mary, but as he was hit, it went short and it was intercepted. They'd lose 38-33, but the Anthony Richardson hype was back. Except it wouldn't last for that long. He'd go for 240 yards and 2 touchdowns and a win over Eastern Washington, and then had a horrible performance and a win over Missouri. In that game, he went 8 of 14 for 66 yards with a touchdown and a pick. Luckily, they still got the win, but then he would struggle against LSU and would struggle a lot against number 1 Georgia. While no one was going to hold the LSU and Georgia losses against him, those were 2 of the better defenses he played, and he didn't really do much. After that, he would bounce back with arguably his best game of the year, as he combined for 4 total touchdowns in a road victory over Texas A&M. Following that, Richardson would go for 3 touchdowns and a victory over South Carolina before he'd put a stain on his resume. While he did throw for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, Richardson and the Gators lost to Vanderbilt, which was definitely inexcusable to Florida fans and is going to be a major knock on his season. To finish the year, he'd play against Florida State, and that game was very weird. He completed only 33% of his passes, but he still managed to throw for 3 touchdowns in a close loss to the Seminoles. On the year, Richardson would throw for 2,549 yards with 17 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. He also had over 600 yards on the ground with 9 scores there. He was wildly inconsistent, but he was never viewed as a college star and more so someone who could flourish at the next level. As Anthony continued to go through the pre-draft process, some thought he had the highest ceiling of any quarterback in the draft, and others thought he'd be the biggest bust. Personally, I saw him as the 3rd best quarterback prospect, and was way more sold on him than Levis. Ultimately, he was projected to go in the top 10, and eventually the Colts took him at the 4th overall selection. As he goes into the Colts organization, there is going to be a lot of pressure on him. The last 2 times that the Colts drafted a top 5 quarterback was when they had Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning. Over the last few years, they bounced around with journeyman quarterbacks such as Carson Wentz, Phillip Rivers, and Matt Ryan, and the Colts are now looking for a young franchise quarterback who can hopefully at least play for a decade. Richardson knows the pressure on him. He said, quote, "I feel like I've been dealing with pressure my whole life, so pressure isn't anything new for me, and playing at the University of Florida, I felt there was a lot of pressure in that as well. So it doesn't really do anything but create a legend. Pressure is only hard if you're not prepared, and obviously I showcased that I can be a huge talent. But there are a lot of things that can clean up. Richardson obviously has great arm strength, is a great athlete, and physically looks the par of a big-time quarterback, but he's got to work on his accuracy, and we just don't know how he's going to translate. He's definitely a boom or bust player, and personally, I think he'll struggle his first 2 years, but eventually figure it out down the road. But what do you guys think? If you're a Florida or a Colts fan, what do you think of Anthony Richardson? How do you think he'll do at the Colts? And what player from this year's draft should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.